You probably think rent is expensive because landlords are greedy. That's what the headlines tell you. That's what the debates focus on. Corporate landlords, rent control, price gouging. But what if the real shock isn't coming from the landlords at all? What if it's something deeper, something structural, something nobody's prepared to talk about yet? Picture this: a young nurse in Phoenix, scrolling through rental listings at midnight after her shift. 2 years ago, she could afford a one-bedroom near the hospital for 30% of her income. Standard advice. Manageable. Today, that same apartment costs 52% of what she makes. She hasn't been demoted. She got a raise, actually. The landlord didn't double the rent overnight. But something changed. Something beneath the surface. And it's not just Phoenix. It's not just nurses. From Tampa to Boise, from Austin to Charlotte, millions of Americans are facing a rent shock that has nothing to do with the usual suspects. This isn't about a villain. It's about a collision. A collision between how we've built our cities, how we've financed our homes, how we've regulated our land, and how many people now need a place to live. The math has broken. The system that worked for decades, the assumption that housing would sort itself out, that supply and demand would balance, that working people could always find something affordable, that assumption is collapsing in real time. And the consequences are just beginning to surface. This is the rent shock nobody's talking about yet. Rent used to mean stability. For generations of Americans, it was the stepping stone. You rented for a few years, saved up, bought a house, built equity, passed something down. Renters were temporary. Homeownership was the destination. That was the identity. That was the promise. Rent was what you did before you arrived. But that script has been rewritten. Today, renting isn't a phase. It's permanent. Nearly half of American households under 40 now rent, and the numbers are climbing. In cities across the Sun Belt and Mountain West, entire generations have aged out of the starter home dream. They're not waiting to buy anymore. They've stopped waiting. The break happened quietly, over 2 decades. Home prices rose 3 times faster than wages. Mortgage rates doubled in 18 months. Down payment requirements ballooned. Inventory collapsed. By the time the pandemic ended, the gap between renting and owning had become a chasm. According to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, the number of cost-burdened renters, those paying more than 30% of income on housing, reached a record high, affecting tens of millions of households. This isn't a temporary squeeze. It's a recalibration, and the mechanisms driving it are stacking, not competing. First, land. In the fastest-growing metro areas, developable land is either locked up by zoning restrictions or priced beyond the reach of modest builders. Single-family zoning still dominates 75% of residential land in major cities, even as demand for multifamily housing explodes. Second, construction costs. Lumber, labor, permits, impact fees. Building a new apartment unit now costs nearly double what it did a decade ago. Developers can't pencil out affordable projects. They build luxury or they build nothing. Third, financialization. Institutional investors didn't cause the crisis, but they accelerated it. When homes become assets in a portfolio, when rent is a yield target, the tenant becomes a data point. Prices rise to match what the market can extract, not what the community can sustain. A family in Charlotte saw it firsthand. The father works in logistics, the mother in retail. 3 years ago, they rented a townhouse for $1,400 a month. Last year, the property was sold to an out-of-state investment group. The rent jumped to $2,200. No upgrades. No improvements. Just new ownership. They moved an hour outside the city. His commute tripled. Her hours got cut because she couldn't make the early shifts anymore. Their son switched schools mid-year. The rent didn't break them, but the cascading costs did. The first people to feel this aren't the professionals. They're the service workers, the line cooks, the home health aides, the retail clerks, the delivery drivers. The people who keep cities functioning but can't afford to live in them anymore. In Austin, a bartender who's worked downtown for 8 years just gave notice. Not because he's leaving the industry, because he's leaving the city. His rent went from $900 to $1,600 in 3 lease cycles. His wages went up 11%. His rent went up 78%. He's moving 2 hours north, to a town he's never visited, because it's the only place he can afford and still work in Texas. This is the new American migration. Not across borders, not state to state. It's the exodus from core to periphery, from walkable to car dependent, from opportunity to affordability. Data from the Census Bureau shows that metro counties are losing domestic migrants to exurban and rural counties at rates not seen since the 1970s. But this time, it's not white flight. It's economic displacement. The mechanisms are different, but they're interconnected. Start with wage stagnation. Real wages for the bottom 50% of earners have grown less than 10% over 20 years. Meanwhile, rents in high-growth metros have grown 40 to 60% in the same period. Then layer in gig economy volatility. A third of renters now rely on inconsistent income streams, freelance work, shift-based hours, app-based gigs. Landlords see that as risk. They charge more. They require higher credit scores. They reject applications, add childcare costs, healthcare premiums, student debt. The rent isn't the only thing rising. It's rising into an affordability ceiling that's already collapsed. A single mother in Tampa, working as a pharmacy tech, makes $42,000 a year. After taxes, that's about $3,100 a month. A two-bedroom apartment near her daughter's school costs $1,900. That's 61% of her take-home. She's one car repair away from eviction, one medical bill, one missed shift. She's not irresponsible. She's trapped in math that doesn't work. And there are millions like her. Geography used to be destiny. If you couldn't afford New York, you moved to Charlotte. If Charlotte got expensive, you tried Nashville. If Nashville priced you out, there was always Indianapolis or Tulsa or Wichita. There was always somewhere cheaper. That map is disappearing. The rent shock isn't contained anymore. It's not just the coasts. It's not just the booming Sun Belt metros. It's spreading into second-tier cities, small towns, rural counties that were supposed to be the escape valves. Boise, Idaho. 10 years ago, it was the affordable alternative. Retirees, remote workers, families priced out of California, they all flooded in. Rents doubled in under a decade. According to regional housing reports, median rent in Boise rose from around $700 to over $1,400 between 2012 and 2022. Local workers, the ones who'd lived there for generations, got economically exiled. Spokane, Knoxville, Fort Wayne, Fayetteville. None of these were supposed to be expensive, but the pattern is the same everywhere. An influx of higher-income migrants. A fixed supply of housing. A local workforce that can't compete. The divide isn't just urban versus rural anymore. It's within regions, within counties. A teacher in a small Idaho town can't afford to live in the district where she teaches. A mechanic in Arkansas rents a trailer an hour from the shop because everything closer is full of remote workers from Austin. This is the inversion. The people who serve the community get pushed out. The people who zoom into another city get to stay. It's not sustainable. It's not stable. And it's accelerating. The ripple effects are already showing. Property tax revenues are rising in gentrifying towns, but services aren't improving. Why? Because the tax base is shifting to people who don't use local schools, don't shop at local stores, don't engage with local infrastructure. They're physically present, but economically absent. Meanwhile, the displaced workers are now commuting from farther out, burning more gas, losing more time, contributing less to the local economy. Small towns that were supposed to benefit from migration are instead becoming hollowed-out bedroom communities for people who work elsewhere. When rent becomes unaffordable, the damage doesn't stop at housing. It metastasizes. First, it hits jobs. Workers who can't afford to live near employment centers either quit or commute absurd distances. Restaurants and retail stores in downtown districts are cutting hours because they can't find staff. Not because people don't want to work, because they can't afford the gas to get there. A cafe owner in Denver posted a job for $12 an hour. She got 3 applications. She used to get 30. The applicants all lived more than 40 minutes away. None of them had reliable transportation. She closed the cafe on weekends. She's considering closing permanently. Then it hits schools. Teachers are leaving districts they love because they can't afford to live in them. According to reports from educator unions, teacher turnover in high-cost metros is reaching critical levels, with some districts losing double-digit percentages of their workforce annually. Classrooms are overcrowded. Programs are cut. Students suffer. Not because of policy failure, because of housing failure. Then it hits healthcare. Nurses, EMTs, home health aides. They're abandoning metro hospitals for rural facilities that pay the same but cost half as much to live near. Emergency response times are stretching. Patient care is strained. Not because of a healthcare crisis, because of a rent crisis. And then it hits tax revenues. Cities that rely on sales tax and property tax are watching both erode. Renters spend less locally when most of their income goes to housing. Property owners in gentrifying areas are older and childless, so school funding collapses even as property values rise. Municipalities are caught in a trap. They need affordable housing, but they can't afford to subsidize it. They raise taxes, which pushes more people out. A family in Orlando lived this. The father worked for the city's public works department. The mother was a paraprofessional at an elementary school. They rented a duplex for years. When the landlord sold, the new owner renovated and doubled the rent. They couldn't find anything comparable within 30 miles. They moved to a county with lower-rated schools, fewer services, and no public transit. The father now spends 3 hours a day commuting. The mother had to quit because childcare costs more than she made. Their property taxes went down. Their quality of life collapsed. The reflex has been to fix this with interventions. Rent control, zoning reform, subsidized housing, tax credits for developers. Some cities have tried all of it. None of it has worked at scale. Rent control, the most politically popular solution, has a fatal flaw. It helps current tenants but destroys future supply. Developers stop building. Landlords stop maintaining properties. The housing stock decays. Cities like San Francisco and New York have had rent control for decades. They also have some of the worst housing shortages in the country. Zoning reform is better in theory. Allow duplexes, triplexes, accessory dwelling units. Increase density. Flood the market with supply. But it's glacial in practice. Minneapolis upzoned its entire city in 2018. 5 years later, rents are still rising faster than new units are being built. Why? Because construction costs, permit delays, and neighborhood opposition still strangle projects before they break ground. Subsidized housing is essential but insufficient. The federal government would need to spend hundreds of billions annually to house every cost-burdened renter. That's not happening. Public housing waiting lists in major cities are years long, sometimes over a decade. A single mother in Las Vegas applied for Section 8 assistance in 2019. She's still waiting. Her daughter is now in middle school. Tax credits for developers sound promising until you realize they only pencil out for luxury units. The low-income housing tax credit program has produced thousands of units, but not nearly enough, and many are restricted to households earning 50 to 60% of area median income, still out of reach for the lowest earners. Meanwhile, entire categories of workers are being locked out of homeownership entirely. First-time buyer programs require down payments most renters can't save for when they're spending 60% of income on rent. The solutions aren't wrong. They're just dwarfed by the scale of the problem. It's like bailing out a sinking ship with a coffee cup. So what does this mean for American life? Not in 5 years. Not in a decade. Right now, it means identity is shifting. For generations, America defined itself as a nation of homeowners. Ownership was the dream. Renters were temporary. Now, renters are the plurality. And they're not just young anymore. They're 45, 50, 60. They're raising kids in apartments. They're retiring in rentals. They're aging without equity. The psychological weight of that is only beginning to register. It means migration is reversing. The American story used to be about moving toward opportunity. Cities were magnets. Now they're traps. People are moving away, not toward. And they're moving to places with fewer jobs, fewer services, fewer futures. It means political realignment is coming. Renters vote differently than homeowners. They care about different issues. They're more transient, less rooted, less invested in local governance. As the renter class grows, so does a constituency that doesn't benefit from rising home prices, doesn't care about property taxes, and doesn't trust the system that priced them out. It means family structure is changing. Couples are delaying marriage because they can't afford a place together. Birth rates are dropping because raising kids in a one-bedroom is untenable. Multi-generational households are returning, not by choice, but by necessity. A young couple in Raleigh just moved in with her parents. They both have full-time jobs. Combined, they make $70,000 a year. They couldn't find a two-bedroom for less than half their income. They're 28 and 31. They thought they'd be buying a house by now. Instead, they're sleeping in her childhood bedroom. This isn't temporary. This is structural. The systems that kept housing affordable, public investment, middle-class wage growth, land availability, low construction costs, are all breaking simultaneously. And there's no policy lever that fixes all of them at once. The rent shock is here. It's real. It's spreading. And the people living it don't have the luxury of waiting for solutions. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. This might not be fixable. Not in the way we think. Not by returning to some imagined past where housing was affordable and opportunity was abundant. That world required conditions we no longer have. Cheap land, low costs, stable wages, less demand. Those conditions are gone. The rent shock isn't a crisis. It's a transition. A transition to a society where most people rent for life. Where housing is a service, not an asset. Where equity is something your parents had, not something you'll build. The question isn't whether we can go back. We can't. The question is how we adapt. Do we build a renter's safety net, portable benefits, stronger tenant protections, lifetime lease stability? Or do we let millions cycle through financial precarity, one rent increase away from displacement? Do we rethink cities entirely, denser cores, car-free neighborhoods, mixed income by design? Or do we accept sprawl, supercommutes, and the hollowing out of urban centers? Do we decouple housing from wealth building and create new pathways to economic security? Or do we watch an entire generation age without assets, without inheritance, without stability? The rent shock is revealing something we've ignored for too long. The American housing system was never designed for a majority renter nation. It was designed for owners. And now that the majority can't own, the system is collapsing under its own weight. A man in Phoenix, a teacher for 23 years, just signed a lease for an apartment smaller than the one he had a decade ago. It costs twice as much. He's 51. He'll probably never own a home. He's not bitter. He's just tired. He said something that stuck. I did everything right. I worked. I saved. I stayed out of debt. And it still wasn't enough. That's the rent shock. Not a failure of individual responsibility. A failure of structural design. These patterns aren't abstract. They're happening in every mid-sized city, every growing town, every place people thought was safe from this. What's changed where you live? What disappeared first? The affordability, the neighbors, or the hope? Tell us below.